How can you top that? That's going to have to go into outtakes somewhere, and yes, it has been recorded. It must be Friday, which means it's time for Cosmotronic, and this is episode 4, the Dimensional Gunslinger. And someone in the chat just said that they can see a rabbit with a gun. Well, I can't see a rabbit with a gun. I can, however, see a Kaeyi Dream. Say hello, Kaeyi.
Hello! Sorry, I was pouring a drink. I always talk too much and then my mouth goes dry and I sound like a man. So I was pouring. Hello, I haven't been here for a while.
/wave. And, of course, next to Kaeyi, well, not literally next to Kaeyi, but in the same screen, we've got a Gazimoff.
Buongiorno.
And today is going to be all about WildStar, strangely enough, given the show title, and all about the Gunslinger. Of course, no rabbits involved. It is an Orin in the pretty picture. But before we do anything else, shall we start with some news and catch up on what's been happening? Gazimoff, sir, over to you.
Okay, so there's kind of 4 big topics. There's been a shed load of Esper news over the past week. So we had the Esper Ask Me Anything, which contained its own flavour of information. Loads of little tidbits here and there coming out. A little bit about Esper spells, how they're mainly going to work, how it's more of a psionics-based class than a kind of pulling on arcane in the elements. A little bit about how it's mainly a target-focused healer rather than an AoE-focused healer. And a little bit about gameplay styles and stuff like that, and some really interesting tidbits about how it's very strong on the DPS front as well. So that was great. But by far the best jewel of the week was the Esper live stream on Saturday. And that gave us a load of information, not just about how the class itself is going to work. And I think Jade Martin, who's the Esper class lead, did a fantastic job of taking us through the various different class builds and his philosophy about how Esper classes should work and how you tune it from one thing to another. But also we got a bit of a look at PvP, which is awesome. They had a bit of a duel between the Esper and a warrior played by the warrior class lead. And we also got to see a dungeon, and for the first time we got to see Storm Talon's lair through the eyes of a healer. Now, we hadn't really seen any kind of dungeon combat at all for a long time, and we were kind of asking for this kind of thing. But for them to turn around and say, okay, we're going to show you dungeons, and we're also going to show you how to heal in a dungeon as well, that was quite eye-opening. It also, because Jade died twice during the dungeon because of really heavy pulls, it was a real bit of an eye-opener as well to show that they're not kind of easy-going, comfortable things. These are kind of brutal things that if you put yourself into these, don't expect a cakewalk, and that was really reassuring for me.
And I'll do my... Sorry, Gazimoff, I'll do my quick interjection thing, and I've been banging this drum since I was fortunate enough to do Storm Talon as part of the Arkship. This stuff is actually a little bit challenging. It makes you think. It makes you actually be very, very aware. And people that haven't been used to that recently, well, they're going to get a shock. The flavour is back to some of the WoW vanilla and some of the raiding stuff in terms of awareness and movement. And if you pull too many mobs, you're going to die. And I've been saying that for a while, and people going, no, that'll never happen. The games company won't do that.
And I DPS'd as a Spellslinger through the same dungeon at Arkship as well. I don't think I was in your group, but we did the PvP thing together. We both played. Yes. I think we both played Spellslingers in the PvP match with the PvP lead as well. And then we came second. Can you tell I was a bit geeked out about the whole thing? But it was really good fun. But yeah, so that dungeon was still pretty hard and brutal and unforgiving. And if you wade in there, guns blazing as it were, and try and pull a bit heavily, then yeah, you're going to be introduced to the ground in no uncertain terms. Pretty sharpish. So that was really a bit of an eye-opener as well. But I think that moving on from that, we've also started to see the Spellslinger reveals this week. We had the Spellslinger introduction on Wednesday, and then we had the Ask Me Anything on Thursday. And we've got the live stream for that coming up tomorrow as well. And that's going to be another shed load of information released. But we're getting to that kind of halfway point now where we've had half of the class reveals done. We've got the warrior presumably coming up next week, and then we've got those two unknowns as well coming afterwards. So it's going to be a bit of an interesting time as we go from what we already know, but possibly in a bit more detail, to the deep unknowns in the future.
Redacted.
I don't know your thoughts on it, Kaeyi, but it's going to be really interesting because, you know, the warrior information came out and everyone said, I want to be a warrior. And then the Spellslinger information comes out and everyone says, I want to be a Spellslinger.
I think that's good though, because normally before an MMO comes out, you don't have that much information on the classes. I won't talk about Guild Wars 2 because Guild Wars 2 made quite a few videos as well, and I think maybe Carbine's got their inspiration from that, which is a great thing. I loved it. But let's talk about something like Rift. I didn't know what the classes were going to be like in Rift before they came out. It was just kind of like I would read the little bit of the information, the kind of bio as such on each of the classes and races, and then pick it on launch. So you're kind of like thrown into the game and you think, oh, that's the kind of magey looking thing. I'm normally a magey kind of thing, so I'll pick that. Whereas now we're actually getting such in-depth information that we are really getting to make that decision, and it's kind of like we're committing to it before it comes out. So I think it's really great that people are like each week, like, I want to be this, I want to be that, because maybe people will roll multiple characters and have more than one main. I think that is really great for the game because it gives that longevity and people are going to play it a lot more. So they are doing a great thing in making people hyped. But hopefully when people get to play it, they'll still stick with their choice rather than being like, I hate this is horrible. So I think playing it will definitely change people's minds, but it's really cool that people are excited.
Yeah.
Gazimoff, do you think people are going to be able to stick with their choices? Are we going to see hey, this was the best one of the live presentation, so we're all going to be this? Because from what I've seen at the various shows and bits and pieces, all the classes have a unique flavour. If you haven't managed to go hands-on, you can't go, well, I'm a warrior, I want to be a warrior. I'm a hunter, I want to be a Spellslinger. It doesn't quite translate.
Yeah, I think there'll be two things that happens. I think that there'll be people who've played previous MMOs like World of Warcraft, and they try and find an analogue for their favourite class in WildStar. And that's only common sense because people will try and look for the comfortable slippers. They've got to have a lot to learn with things like active targeting and the more dynamic combat system. And so they'll try and keep things as familiar as possible elsewhere. And that kind of makes sense. But I also think that there'll be people who are prepared to take risks and say, well, I played X class in WoW, I didn't really fancy it, or I fancied trying something different, or I fancied playing something that has a bit of coolness around it, you know, trying to say, okay, I'm going to build a character concept who has this, 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 and this, and build something around that. I think that'd be cool. But I honestly think that one of the really good things that they've made with their class design is that everyone can be both DPS and healer or tank. You won't get that rut where you've got pure class DPS who can do nothing but, and then complain when they have huge looking for group queues and stuff like that. I think the fact that everyone can either heal or tank, depending on which class they pick, will mean that there's a lot more access to group content, a lot more flexibility from players, and a lot more appreciation for people who choose to do those particular roles as well, which we didn't have in World of Warcraft.
It also means that people only necessarily have to roll a maximum of 2 ults to really get the best of all 3 worlds. So you can have, for example, a warrior and have tank and DPS, and you can have an Esper and have DPS and healing. Now you've got 2 ults, but you cover all ground, so you're the best for your raiding team or your guild where you only need 2 ults rather than having 7. But I think the problem for some people, like you said, with the whole finding it and attaching it to WoW. I was a Death Knight in WoW, so in Guild Wars 2 that kind of related to the fact I was a Necromancer because Necromancers were essentially Death Knights. And now in WildStar I'm like, there's nothing that uses undead zombies, so I'm just kind of like trying something new.
Unless one of the redacted has a real trick up its sleeve that we maybe not expecting at this point in time.
Out like zombie bombs. I'm thinking chewers would be like the race to go, but yeah, so it's nice to try something new, like you said.
Yeah. I think the other piece of striking news that came out during the week, just to kind of wrap up that whole thing, is news on beta. Now, we've we kind of got rumours that beta was getting back underway, and it's since come out that yes, it does look like the beta train is running again, which is fantastic. But we've had things like friend invites emerging as well. And Craig Turner, who is kind of Carbine's beta operations honcho, he kind of went onto Reddit and explained what was going on there. So you've had people from the previous beta tests who've been invited back. Some people from the stress tests have been invited back as well, but not all of them. And he's acutely aware that he wants to get all of the stress tests back in once the servers can handle it. But also they've invited some new players, partly to use as a control group, but also they've been sending out friend invites to those guys as well. So they've got an invite plus a couple for their friends to test the system out and see how it works. So you might find that people who've been in the beta for quite some time might end up getting beta invites as well, something like that. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that pans out and how the friend system pans out as well, because we have had a bit of contention recently with some other famous betas for some other big games where they've had friends invites going out, and it's caused a few ructions as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how Carbine manages that process.
It's a difficult balance to hit, because people that have been around for a long time, let's say early stress testers or people that have been in beta since forever, there's maybe a little bit of entitlement, human nature. Hey, I've been here a long time, can I have one of those shiny things? And if the shiny things are going to the new people, it's easy for people to get uptight. However, it makes an awful lot of sense. If people have been in something for a while, they've already formed an opinion. To have a whole new set of people that don't have, I don't know, connections, conversations, anything else about what's going on in that environment, come in and shed their take, their views on the matter, it adds something to the mix. I would imagine, as with any long-term beta, it's going to evolve. So a new player experience in X weeks' time versus X weeks ago, they're going to be different things, so they're going to need that different perspective. But I want to run a quick MMO Buff team straw poll. And we're going to probably do this every single week and see if anything changes. And for now, we'll let people pick maybe two. But let's have the class of choice. Given the information we know today, what do you think you're going to be playing? Gazimoff, let's start with you. Okay.
I'm going to be playing definitely a Chewer Spellslinger at the moment, with what we know at the moment. So, and that's partly because I really enjoy the Chewer as a race. I think they're kind of delightfully mischievous. And I really kind of get their vibe and where they're coming from. And I like Spellslinger because I was playing a mage in World of Warcraft, and I feel that there's a fair bit of an analogue there, but not. But I also kind of get the coolness of having dual pistols and going bang, bang, bang. I will
in and out of the void.
Exactly. I have a horrible feeling that I'm going to be sitting there with kind of mouse and keyboard going pew 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 pew.
No, Gazimoff, you're going to be there going pew pew pew. Oh, why did I die? Because you're going to be on the wrong faction. And everyone on the good side of the fence is going to find you and hunt you down. This is fact.
No. I will be waiting in the void for you to walk past, and I will go, bam, surprise! And then you will die, and it will be terrible.
Kaeyi, enough of doom and gloom. What are you going to be playing?
I'm going to be playing an Orin Esper, provided the information that we have now. I really like it because...
An Orin, what a surprise!
Yeah, Orin, that's not a surprise. But the Esper part of it, I've dabbled with mages and various other kind of caster classes, but I've always settled down on a plate-wearing melee caster, something like a paladin or a death knight. So I think I'm going to mix it up, and I really like the fact that they have targeted heals, because I was a paladin in WoW, so I'm hoping that we'll get like click and grid add-ons so that I can just like heal everyone. Or I'm gonna maybe just try and main DPS this time, so I normally either tank or heal. So I'm gonna try out DPS and see where that takes me.
So I think the Reddit AMA said that they had a few targeted, but also a lot of freeform abilities.
Yeah.
Do you see yourself leaning more towards perhaps the freeform versus the targeted style of things?
No, I think I'm going to lean more to traditional targeted, purely because I like the idea of being like a main tank healer, and sometimes a healer being like standing within range of a tank. That's what I've always liked. I mean, if we relate it to WoW, 'cause it's the easiest thing because it's in the back of our minds, you'd always have the druids as like your raid healers, which is how I see kind of the Spellslinger, or a lot of AoE kind of cone heals, and then the paladin kind of introduced that in Cataclysm when we got a lot more kind of AoE roomy type heals, but it was still predominantly targeted, and that's kind of how I see the Esper. It's got some AoE like cone, but it's also got those targeted. So it's much like a paladin in that sense, and that's why I like it, because it's the closest to paladin possible healing wise.
Okay.
I was going to say I really enjoy the fact that, and we saw this on the Esper live stream, that difference between the Esper's two set of spells. So if you've got the defensive stuff, it's all kind of like blue illusions and stuff like that, like those little spidery minions that go jump, 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 jump. Stuff like that. It's really cool. But when you're doing the healing stuff, you've got that lantern effect that you stomp on the ground, and you've got the
really
rainbow.
Cool.
You've got the rainbow unicorn thing, and you've got those lanterns and the little fishy thing. It's like, yeah, you can really tell.
Martin, my boyfriend, pointed out it looks like Tangled when they have you seen the film Tangled?
I haven't, no.
No, people in the chat. Oh my gosh, it's such letdown. People in the chat must have watched Tangled. There's this one scene where like all these lanterns. It's like famous Disney scene, and it's like that's what Esper reminds me of. It's like all those little lanterns, like healing everyone. It's really happy.
Fantastic. Well, for my part, I am still a little on the fence. I actually have quite a liking for a Orin Spellslinger. I've had a little bit of an opportunity to run around on one of those in various places. Got on pretty well with it. But I also like the idea of possibly a Mordesh redacted. So we'll have to wait a little bit longer for me to make my final choice.
Couple weeks.
Couple of weeks. Yeah. Such a long couple of weeks. But let's see what people are going to say in the channel. Let's put it out there. Guys, let's have it in one, and girls, let's have it in one word. What do you think you're going to be playing? Let's see what people say. And then in a moment, I'm going to ask another question. And that is whether the class drops, the reintroduction, has already changed anyone's mind from what they thought they were going to be playing to what they now think they're going to be playing. So the first straw poll, so to speak, from the channel is, what are people going to be? And I see a number of things. I see Repsgen Worth. I can never pronounce that name. Apparently he thinks that the Chewers are indeed the master race. Well, there's at least two people that are wrong. Avid Guru wants to be a Granok Tanky redacted. Jeradar wants to be a Mordesh redacted. Rain Enigma, Spellslinger, Phyletic, Spellslinger healer. Pick a couple more at random. Ludario is still waiting for the Stalker video. And now here's the second question: has anyone changed their mind about what they want to be based on the class drops? Can anyone say, I was going to be an X, but now I've seen Warrior, I want to be that? I was going to be Y, but now I've seen Esper, I want to be that.
I think that may happen to me in the future, like when the redactics are announced. I might change then, but at the moment I've been set on Esper always. Well, like I tried Spellslinger at Gamescom, I think it was, and it just wasn't really my thing. Like I didn't like it, and I tried Stalker and I didn't like it, and then it's like, well, that's my only options for Orin. So if it comes out that any of the redacteds are then Orin, then I might change my mind. But at the moment I'm set on, I have to be an Orin. That's it.
I was looking at one of the videos that they did recently, and right at the end of it they had all the classes lined up, and they had one class with something on its back and another class with this huge bazookery type thing from the looks of things on its back. I'm looking at that second one intently to find out what it is, because if it's what I think it is, then I'm just imagining my little chewer with this huge thing. With a huge drill in its face.
So it's official. Gazimoff finds big bazookas interesting. Right. Sorry, folks. Lowering the tone. We'll bring things back into where they should be. Let's have a quick overview then. We've had the Reddit AMA. We're waiting for the stream tomorrow. This episode is all about Spellslingers. Let's try and typify them. Some of us are a little bit of hands-on, so we'll start with you, Kaeyi, as we've had the most hands-on with them. What do you think the Spellslinger is? Try and encapsulate it, how it comes across to you at the moment.
A pew-pew laser wielding space robot cowboy.
So we have pew-pew laser space wielding robot cowboy. Okay. Gazimoff, what's your take?
It's kind of like...
Oh, go, Kaeyi.
Yeah, it's kind of like Lara Croft in space. That's how I think it is.
Okay. Gazimoff.
For me, it reminds me an awful lot of... if you've ever watched a film called Titan AE, which was this... I can't remember if it was a Warner Brothers or a Disney Pixar, but it was a kind of futuristic animated movie that's well worth picking up and just watching for a bit of a laugh. I think it's on Netflix. For me, the shooty combat in that game, in that film rather, reminds me a lot of how I see the Spellslinger working. Admittedly, it's a bit more magical than that. You're shooting magic bullets rather than proper ammo or proper lasers, but that's kind of where it's coming from. And it's also got that kind of sci-fi vibe to it as well, that you actually have pistols that look like they're ripped from some kind of 1950s, 1960s Buck Rogers sci-fi movie, or involving Martian invasions and stuff like that. So that's where I think it's coming from. But they've tried to make it their own with WildStar, with the whole kind of step into the void and stuff like that. So there's a little bit of unusualness going on, but they've not just, from the looks of things, they haven't just copy-pasted Stalker Stealth and applied it to the Spellslinger. They've given it its own kind of vibe thing. So I'm finding the class really interesting. I'm really hoping to see how it's going to kind of heal people by shooting them in the face. And I think that's going to probably come out on the stream tomorrow. But it's a shame that they said there's going to be no friendly fire, because you can quite imagine, like, oh, sorry. Oh, sorry.
I thought it was a heal.
I mean, one thing that came across to me, getting a little bit of hands-on with the class, is just how fluid the movement is. It was very, not quite frantic, but it was constant. Certainly when you're in an arena, it's possibly frantic. But everything can be done on the move. I know there's references to it being the ultimate kiting class, and I can see how that would work from a logical perspective. And a great comment in the chat, and it came from the Dist. It's Mal from Firefly with magic guns. I think that actually could work quite well. So it looks like being a lot of fun. Who's it going to appeal to? Well, it appeals to me as someone that plays the hunter archetype. You've said it appeals to you, Gazimoff, as someone that plays the mage archetype elsewhere. Is there anyone else that should be looking at it?
Well, I guess anyone who played like Star Wars: The Old Republic. I don't know the classes that well, but I'm guessing there are a lot of classes who use that kind of weapon, and the same for the and the same for the Secret World. There was guns in that, as far as I remember. But yeah, I think people who have had the more modern MMOs and have experienced that form of weaponry will definitely be enticed by it. But as you said, it applies to many of the WoW classes, which is, you'd never think, oh, it's like a hunter and a mage mixed together. You'd never think you'd see those two classes, but it actually kind of is. So
that probably does sum it up. So what do we know about it? Well, we've had a few bits and pieces. The drop's been redone. There was the information on Wednesday. So we know, first of all, we've got humans, Orins, and Exiles as being the available races on one side of the fence. Gazimoff, on your side of the fence, as I don't like to go there.
So from what I understand, it is human, Mordesh and Chewer that can be Spellslingers on the Dominion side. I do not believe that...
So Dominion side would be Draken, not Mordesh, I think.
I don't think that Draken. So Makari. So I think you've got Cassian, Makari, and Chewer. I don't think that the Draken can be Spellslingers.
Okay.
I think it's kind of like the clawy hands. I don't think they're like.
They can't hold guns.
Unless I'm misreading things, a quick trip to the WildStar page might disagree with you.
Oh really?
Let me see. Yes, I'm getting it. Am I misreading this? I'm getting Cassians, Chewers, and Draken. They obviously have to modify.
Oh, really?
They have to modify those pistol grips.
That's interesting, because I would have thought.
Have I got that wrong before we say that?
No, it's Cassian, Chewer, and Draken. Yeah.
Okay.
You're right.
Really? So, because that surprises me,
Wow,
because you know
weird.
the
Makari, yeah.
you remember the Meet the Dominion kind of thing?
Yeah.
Where you had the Malvolio Porteous introduced the Makari.
Get me something expensive.
Yeah, he said, a sense of humour sadly lacking, and the Makari pulls out a pistol and goes pew off camera. And I was thinking, well, Gaffney said that anything they put in their videos is in the game.
Yeah.
So I thought from that. So I feel like I'm doing a bit of a red shirt guy moment here.
No, but then they also put an Orin with a staff in one of their videos, and I have not seen a staff wielding class, and it makes me very sad. But there is a well-known picture of an Orin holding a staff. So I'm like, where's that coming from?
It could be. I mean, it could be a quest or something that involves an object, a pure
Yeah,
guesswork.
or it could be a redacted. Like, we might all be tricked on what we think they are, and they might not actually be what we
shock
think
horror.
they are.
There are now 3 redacted. The other one's hidden.
Yeah. How? Oh, my mind would be blown. I'd just be like, ah.
That would actually be the ultimate troll of all time if that were to be the
Yeah,
case.
it would be. They made the other 2
Calling
redacted so public that the third one was just never found out.
Oh, we shall see. I very much doubt it somehow.
Was it going to be Space Monk? Space Monk, you get a stick.
It's got to be better than Space Goat. Right. Where are we going to go to now? So we know what it can be race-wise. We know what it can be. We're talking about the class itself. We've looked at the archetypes it actually is going to cover. So what do we know and what don't we know about it? So the Reddit AMA has come out, and of course I had the fun and games of looking through that the other day. Any standout moments from that for either of you two? And you've lost your focus a little bit, Gazimoff. As in the screen, the image, you've gone pixelated. You've gone out of focus. You're blurry.
I personally haven't read the AMA only because I have the attention span of a goldfish when it comes to reading things. I will sit there and watch Frost stream for 5 hours if he did it, and he would have my attention like completely. But when it comes to reading things, I'm not that keen on it. So
no problem. Well, I did have a perusal of it earlier, strangely enough. Let's see. Oh, go Gazimoff.
So I think for me that the main kind of stuff that cropped out from the Ask Me Anything was the feel that the Spellslinger is very strongly different to the Esper, because I have this feeling that you've got 2 caster classes, both of which are ranged, both of which are both shooting and healing. It makes them kind of feel that they're kind of very, very similar. And it's quite interesting that the Esper is kind of heavier on crowd control and stationary abilities that do more damage or healing, whereas the Spellslinger is less on crowd control, more on mobility, and has less potent damage and healing as a result from standing still, but it can be much more mobile as a result. I'm hoping that realistically, when you get into dungeon and raid scenarios, raids in particular, that will balance out, that you'll find that they kind of even level pegging on the damage and healing charts. One thing I am kind of disappointed that we didn't really get a feel for, and I'm hoping this is going to crop up in the live stream, is to really get an understanding of how the Spellslinger is going to work doing kiting. Because if most of the crowd control stuff is with the Esper, and I think it's mostly kind of stuns and stuff like that, are we going to see slowing effects on the Spellslinger that they can cast to really start doing that kiting? And are we going to get some really impressive kiting stuff? Are we going to be seeing people, for example, kite metal more across the world and stuff like that? Like the good old
if
days
it's
of
possible,
Warcraft.
I will. I was the guy that used to like to kite things, halfway across a continent without it leashing before they fixed that bug and stopped us dropping off interesting demons in places where there were lower level characters. Yes, I used to have a ton of fun, basically, and a great way of testing your skills, if I go back to the Hunter analog, is doing all of that kiting. Stuff that will one-shot you, so don't let it near you. But if we think about that Hunter analog and kiting, the Hunter had tools that allowed it to actually get that job done. The first one was the ubiquitous jump shot. It was one of the first sort of tests of skill. It's like is it the Cubs or the Scouts where you get the badges for all the different achievements? And I feel like you should have a badge as a hunter that said, I can kite for 25 meters, and later on you graduate to the I can kite for 100 meters badge. But you had tools to do it, so you were able to jump, turn in midair, fire behind you, land, carry on running, not lose your momentum. You had, of course, your slowing abilities, and they were key. So if they want the Spellslinger to be able to kite, there needs to actually be the tools to do it. And there's different choices they could make. It could all be about slows and movements. It could be about jump shots. We just don't have the information yet to comment. But I really like that separation, because there needs to be a rationale in terms of playstyle differences between the ranged classes. So, yes, it's clearly not a Hunter analog, because the Esper has got the crowd control, whereas the Hunter used to throw its traps out. And of course mages had the polymorph, the ice block, and there's probably other things I'm not thinking of right now on mage. What do you think, Kaeyi, about that differentiation in playstyles? Should people be looking at the mechanics of the playstyle first? Because this is where we don't have that direct similarity. Someone might say, well, there is nothing whereby I want to have a pet, plus I want to have crowd control, plus I want to be ranged, because that class exists in WoW. That's a different game. Over here, it's a different set of rules.
I think the main things that we've kind of pointed out on the streams that will sway people, it's like the Spellsinger is a lot more mobile, whereas they said the Esper is a lot more stationary. So if you're someone who does prefer to stand still whilst casting because you're used to that WoW gameplay, the Esper might be something that's a kind of an introduction class for you into WildStar, because you are going to have some of those stationary skills, so you're not going to be bombarded with moving everywhere. But then obviously you have got the telegraph system to worry about, and the Spellslinger for the advanced player might be more appealing because you can move around a lot and dodge and things like that. And essentially, yes, they both have casting abilities, but they also mentioned that the Esper has a lot of melee ranged abilities, whereas if I'm right, the Spellslinger has one of the largest ranges in the game.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so if you like something that's a little bit more up close and personal, but still kind of that mage feel, then the Esper's more for you. And if you like something that you are very mobile and you have a longer range, you can kind of kill things before they get to you, then obviously the Spellslinger's for you. So I think there are a lot of things to consider, which, like you mentioned, it's a lot more to consider than we previously have had in other games, because it was simple. I want a pet, I'm a hunter. I want a big sword, I'm a warrior. I want undead minions, I'm a death knight. It was easy, whereas now it's kind of very, very complex into your choice.
Completely agree with you. It was one of those things where if you looked at the Esper live stream, they went from Jade was brilliant at showing off the various different parts, where you had a nice ranged Esper, and then a melee Esper, and then a healing Esper as well, and how they all worked in the various different things. I also think that it was really interesting to see the comparison to, yes, you're quite right, the Spellslinger has a 40-meter spell which is longer than anything the Esper has, and that's True Shot. I think that goes hand in hand with them increased mobility as well. And I think you're quite right that people who are familiar with how casters work will probably stick with the Esper for the most part, because it's like putting on a comfortable pair of shoes. It'll feel familiar. But I think for people who want to push their skill a little bit further, or possibly use more to FPS style combat and want to bring that FPS feel into their MMO, the Spellslinger might be a more of a home for them.
So let's throw one comment out from the AMA, and I'll dive into some great stuff that's bouncing around the channel. They've said that obviously as time goes on, we know already we get our LAS, we get a choice of abilities, but as time goes on, they'll expand. And I believe it was said in the Reddit that by endgame, you could turn around and say, well, actually, I want to be a mobile Esper, or I actually want to have some abilities where if I'm standing still, I get benefits. So you can still make those choices, but I wonder to what degree those choices are going to be compromises. Well, I'm going to make this character able to be mobile, but its forte is when it doesn't have to be. Or to what degree those choices are going to be, actually, this is a really specific spec and build for a specific fight. And I'm thinking raiding, and I'm thinking war plots, and all this stuff in the future we're yet really to find out about. But the concept of I'm going to equip myself to be able to do this specific task. And it's interesting as a statement across all the classes that there is this Swiss Army knife approach to what do I want to equip? How do I want to be configured? And I wonder how they're going to balance that with not running into the trap of, and I'm going to put its big word of the daytime, not run into the trap of homogeneity. There we go. Making all the classes homogeneous and sharing, homogenized, and sharing all of their various traits. How can that be balanced?
Okay, so the big problem with homogenization is that it comes to a sticking point once you start getting players who are largely operating at the skill cap of what the game provides. This is something that we found with World of Warcraft over time, as players have managed to approach the skill cap because they get used to the whole kind of hotkey-based combat, and the whole action in those games now is based around okay, I have my rotation, or I have my hotkey priority system, or whatever you'd like to have for your particular class, and boss fights are designed around trying to disrupt your ability to follow that pattern of whatever shape it is. And the strength of a boss fight is determined against their ability to disrupt, and your skill as a player is the ability to recover or adapt or whatever to the various scenarios that are thrown at you, while still being able to maximize your ability to perform that pattern. I think that once you start getting into a game where being able to fire your shot in the correct direction is as important as what shot it is, that skill cap is raised dramatically. And that's one of the things that I find really curious about WildStar. We haven't seen this to an extent with Guild Wars 2 because they don't have very much PvE content. They've focused on open world PvE, dungeon-based PvE, and PvP. We haven't seen it also with the Secret World, although they do have a fair bit of raiding in that game. So WildStar is going to be the first time that we actually see this kind of formation in action, where we've got a large skill cap for what players can perform, and it should really pull the difference between those people who know what buttons to press in the right sequence and those people who know where to move out from, how to fire them, and how to adapt with what's going on. So you can kind of see my point, and I think that that's going to be kind of the most interesting part. I'm hoping that the balance between the abilities only makes a thin layer of that, so you can get much better performance from being able to play better and position yourself better than you can from trying to push balance.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, balance is an illusion. The idea of trying to have everything able to do the same kind of output as everything else is pretty difficult to achieve and gets to the point of absurdity. The only thing you can help with is in PvP that you have a kind of rock, paper, scissors solution, so everything has a counter or an ability to work against it. And in PvE, you have different scenarios that can take advantage of the different ways the classes work. Sorry for going off on a bit of one there. I think
No, that's fine. I completely agree. I think, and a lot of people are worried. I've seen a lot of people in the chat now about the Esper's mobility. There was one move in particular in the dev speak that was the spin to win type move. Now, I'm hoping that will play a big part in any sort of like player's rotation. That seems very mobile. So I think, as much as the Spellslinger is very freeform and can run around, the Esper seems to have a lot of moves that kind of have a lot of mobility, and then they have moves that are stationary. So they go from one scale to the other. So I don't think people need to worry. But again, as I said at the beginning, people will play their classes and then probably change their mind. So
yeah, I'd agree with you. The Spellslinger, not the Spellslinger, the Esper Innate as well is deliberately designed as a kind of counter for that. So the Esper's Innate, every class has an innate ability where they can hit it. It's got something like a 3-5 minute cooldown, I think, on it, and it's a class defining thing, so it's always on your hotkey bar. The Esper's one, you hit that, and not only does it bump up all of your side points so you can immediately start dropping the big damaging stuff, but it also makes you immune to all forms of damage for 5 seconds. So if you're really in the crap and you need to have something to get out of it, then there's the magic button to hit to give you a bit of a breather. And I think that's a counter to their lack of mobility. So if things start getting a bit intense, you can get yourself back up, pick yourself back up, and carry on. So
let's touch on some of those class-defining things, and the chat was talking about this earlier. And of course, I think it's called, is it Slip into the Void? What do we know, if anything, because I'm in the dark here, with regards to the Void as something in lore with WildStar? There's this alternate temporal dimension that someone once upon a time discovered they could get bullets from. So the 6-shooter became kind of, I now have a 72.5 shooter and you're dead. And then some bright spark went, well, we can slip into the Void too. Is there anything else out there I've missed in lore terms, or anything else to talk about the Void and what it is?
I don't know much about it at all.
I think that the Void is just a kind of loose term for an alternative dimension. From what I understand, only Spellslingers can drop into the Void, and they can only do so for a brief period of time before being yanked back to reality.
Yep.
And I think that it's going to be interesting for people to use it as a kind of, just like the mage had an invisibility effect and could walk around while invisible and reposition themselves. And it made, while you were invisible, you were immune to some forms of damage, but not to others. I think that the Void is, or hopping into a dimension is an extension of that. And it works really nicely with the Spellslinger's other abilities, like Gate, for example, where they can blip forward and being able to swap places with monsters and stuff like that. I think it all kind of wraps nicely together. I think the interesting thing that they did mention was that if you step into the Void, other Spellslingers can follow you into the Void. What happens if you get killed in the Void? Do you get trapped there permanently?
Your character is deleted.
Yes, it's the new version of WildStar hardcore mode for Spellslingers. Step into the Void if you dare.
How funny would that if that was like a bug though? Like, you know, as much as I don't want them to have bugs on launch, that would be the funniest bug to have, that any Spellslingers just died in
the Void, stays dead. So yes, anyone in beta, go test that, please.
I think the other thing that I'm kind of hoping for is, and this is something else that they alluded to, is what happens if people start abusing the whole stepping into the Void thing? Are you going to start getting little snacky monsters kind of sneaking around in there?
Well, I mean, the Spellslingers themselves, as I understand it, can't lurk in the Void. They're in there for 5 seconds. This is taken from the Reddit AMA, and I think you can talent or amp to be in there for a little longer. I think 7 seconds. It adds something great to PvP. So you're a Spellslinger. You're fighting a Spellslinger. The Spellslinger's down to 5% health, and it drops into the Void. Do you follow?
Yes.
You've suddenly got this concept of, for 5 seconds or 7 seconds, you've got your own personal battleground, your own personal space. And to me, 7 seconds is a long, long time in PvP. A lot can happen in 7 seconds. And they also hinted that in certain areas of the game world, places that are critical, they could put the things that lurk in the night in the void. Indeed, making them the things that lurk in the void.
Void walkers.
So
I was thinking it would be really cool if you had, say, a dungeon layout with all its various barricades and stuff like that, or an arena layout, probably more accurately, with all its various barricades and stuff for people to leap over. And you step into the void, and you might find that some of those barricades aren't there. I think little features like that could be quite interesting as a tactical play.
In fact, that could be really awesome in a dungeon somewhere where the Spellslinger, a little bit like the, I think they've said that path overlaps will start to offer opportunities, like the Explorer can open the way. It'd be good if, say, somewhere the Spellslinger could slip into the void, go past the obstacle, and hit a button and open the way for the rest of the group. Lots of opportunities for
Cool.
dynamics. There.
Yeah, it'd be like mages blinking through walls all over again.
Yeah.
Except for the fact that mages were never supposed to be able to blink through walls. What else has come out in the AMA that's particularly interesting or exciting? Do we perhaps have questions that have actually been raised that haven't been answered? So while you throw your answer out there, Gazimoff, to the chat, from the AMA, are there any questions that it raised or answers that perhaps are a little obscure? Things we might try and find some clarification on, but while you're thinking about that, back to Gazimoff.
I found that the quite interesting thing, and this is going back to the Esper stuff, that I didn't get, we didn't get a chance to talk about last week, was on the whole polymorph thing. While we're talking about mages, they were talking about giving the Espers a polymorph, and it didn't happen. They decided to have a gadget-based polymorph instead, which makes my little chewer even more interesting. The fact that you could hopefully have a gadget that goes zap, turns people into, I don't know, something like a Chompacobra or a Jabbit or something like that.
Would that be the remit of all classes, or might that be a redacted thing, or?
No, any class, from what they were saying, and I think this was the Esper Reddit, any class can pick up this gadget and equip it and do polymorph crowd controls with it, which is really interesting. So it's like, I need test subjects for science. You'll do.
Fantastic. Kaeyi Jesper has raised a question to do with casting. So, when a cast is finished, will you take damage if you're in the telegraph instantly, or when the spell reaches you? Now that's an interesting one, because that actually raises a separate question, as in, is there travel time on spells and abilities? Now I'm trying to think back to our arena run-through, Gazimoff, and it was all too fast and frantic for me to comfortably try and answer that question.
Well, you've got the telegraphs that obviously in the streams they've now added the cast time in them, which they showed. So you may be standing in a telegraph, but you might not take damage because the meter is coming towards you. And as long as you get out of it before that bar reaches down, then you're not going to take damage. But I'm not sure on like traveling time. I mean, I'm pretty sure if that bar hits you and you are there, unless you're dodging, you're going to take damage. Yeah,
that's the way it looks from. That's the way it's looked from what I've seen as well. So, if for example, you have an attack that does just a single hit, then you get the telegraph filling up, and you eventually take damage from it. If you've got something that does multiple hits, then it looks like the telegraph fills up 3 times. Quite rapidly,
once per
hit. To say bang, bang, bang. So I think that's how it will work for those ones.
Okay, now another question from the chat from Phletic. People are a little concerned over raid healing, not being able to get a heal off to that guy who's on 3% health, and they've said it's a concern they're working on and they're trying to iron it out. And Phletic's asking how we think they might tackle it. So I guess we have to define the problem a little better in the first place. You know, first of all, why can someone not get that heal off on someone on 3%?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 parts to this problem. The first part is if you've got a crowd of 39 other players and one of those players who might not be the tank is low on health, how do you actually chuck a heal to them? Now, there are the two ways of tackling that. First one was something that Jade was using as the Esper, which was an ability called Mind and Body, where you target the person who needs the heal, and it chucks a heal on them, but it also puts a heal on the ground where they're standing. It puts a kind of staff animation and stamps into the ground, and then does a little AoE heal as well. So that's one compromise, but it's not a very good one, and it's possibly not as efficient. What I would like to see is telegraphs where you're chucking out a heal, and it prioritizes those people on the lowest health. So if you do a stripe telegraph, but I think that the biggest things are going to be, once we start people doing raid testing, to start trying to do things with nameplates or something like that to say, this guy here is really low on health and you should consider healing him. So you might have healer add-ons that are specific towards alerting people that are low on health or have severe amounts of incoming damage and stuff like that. Well, click and grid, but I'm hoping it's something that's a bit more, because grid is helpful if you've got the ability to kind of do whack-a-mole. But what happens with WildStar, you're going to need something that actually pinpoints where they are on the ground.
Because
so.
they've talked about having tech in the AMA to prioritize heals, so they gave 3 examples, I think. And it was, heal the nearest X, heal the X on the lowest amount of health within the area, and there was one more. Lowest, I can't think what the third one is. Channel will have to help me out here. But there were 3 examples given.
I mean, some people are saying in their chat, for example, that people should be running to the healer, but I don't think that's always the case. I think you're not going to, if there's a tank, you're not going to be like, tank, please bring that boss you're tanking to the healer so that you can be healed. I think
quick raid tip, that's not a good idea.
So I think people who are dedicated to main tank healers will have to be very mobile. They'll be having to be moving out of telegraphs as well as staying near the tank enough to heal them with either AoE heals or their targeted heals. And people who are, I think you'll still have that. You'll still have tank healers and raid healers. I don't think people will just be like randomly healing whoever they want. And then the raid healers will have to be very aware of where the raid is, and the raid will also have to be aware of where the healers are. And I think that will be a very a duo takes 2 to tango type thing. But I think definitely still with main tank dedicated healers, they will be prioritized to stay around the tank.
I also think you'll end up with...
Sorry, Gazimoff, Jesper's being awesome. He's linked to the actual particular element, and it was by CRB Clinch. And the 3 were the X closest, the X lowest health, and interestingly, the X furthest. Alongside the fact that they can do a number of others as well. Back to you, Gazimoff.
So that goes back to what I was saying about trying to have someone who heals that specifically target the person on the lowest health. And Nianchu raised a similar point about having a way of being able to identify the person on lowest health or people who are low on health. And I think you're quite right. You'll either need a marker or a nameplate or something like that above their head. Whether that's something that Carbine build in as standard, or whether it's something that the add-on community puts together as part of the raid UIs that they build, either way, I think it'll appear. But I think that the other thing that you'll probably find happening is that people who can heal might end up dropping maybe 1 or 2 small healing spells in their own ability sets just to top themselves off. And I also think that those who can't are going to have maybe 1 or 2 shield focused abilities to kind of recharge their shields, just to keep them topped off as well. It might not be their main job, but it might be a kind of like a survivability kind of thing. So
I think it'd be very silly for someone to have just straight up 8 assault skills fully amped out and spec'd up just to be. I mean, everyone had the it would be mixed, but I mean, a Death Knight had the green, the anti-magic shield. Mages had various abilities that protected them. Everyone had those abilities in WoW, but because we could have as many action bars as we wanted, we didn't think about it. So now with only 8 slots, we do need to think about maybe having one of those being a defensive type thing.
In fact, it says something really interesting to me for raiding and progression content, because you might need the really, really high DPS in a given environment, and let's say you haven't yet collected the gear, you've not been on that gear treadmill for long, so your margin of error is just non-existent if you're trying to push the envelope. And you'll find people saying, well, I have to have every single DPS ability on my Laz, because otherwise we can't achieve the target this week. We can't afford to drop one. And therefore, the group dynamic has to deal with it.
Exactly. It also depends on the fights you're doing as well, because if you're doing something like patchwork, which is a straight up DPS check, then if you're not tanking and you're not healing the tanks, then you will have every single DPS ability under the sun on your limited action set, because that's what the fight's about. If you're doing something like, oh, I don't know, lower Theb or something like that, then you will have much more in terms of both DPS and self-sustaining abilities to try and keep yourself up.
It lets someone comment on their own ability to not stand in the fire. And that, I think, is actually really interesting. Okay.
Jared does just made a good point in that sometimes more damage abilities don't exactly equal more damage. I think that's a very good point also. I mean, there's not many rotations or, you know, set kind of... If you're having to, for example, most of these classes rely on building up various things. So you'll have a couple of, say, 4 or 5 skills that will build up various points, whether it's Psi or whether it's charges or, I don't know, whatever it is. Then you have to have those finishing moves. And I think that will equal up to like 6 or 7, and then you still would have a couple spare. But I think, just because you have a full action set, it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be able to play them all, because you might not earn enough build-up points to do all those finishes.
Yeah, I do find it interesting the way that Carbine have gone for things like a primary resource and a secondary resource. So things like the Esper, you've got your Psi points and you've got your focus. I think the Spellslinger uses focus as well, and they use their
I think some heals are, I saw some heals were focus based, some heals were the side points, so it does depend on how you want to play. You could be pure like mage type using your mana resource, or could be kind of building up those other resources.
Their spell power to increase the strength of abilities, focused as the cast cost, and of course the interaction with spell surge. So spell surge being the innate, it consumes spell power for each second that it is active, and when it's active, things do more stuff. Heals and damage numbers will increase, so it's kind of like your own personal cooldown to manage. Those who are familiar with that from other games.
It's kind of like your personal heroism, but in different forms.
And probably not as powerful.
Or bloodlust, whatever side you're on.
Indeed. It's always interesting there was a big difference there, but let's not go there right now.
I also find it really interesting, one of the things that came out was that they haven't gone for any abilities that are just pure buffs or pure debuffs. Instead, they've decided to tag those buffs and debuffs onto active combat abilities. So you might shoot someone in the face and apply a debuff to them, or you might pump someone full of bullets of magical healing and apply a buff to them. And I thought that was a really cool thing, but it means that you're going to have to keep on your toes to keep those buffs and debuffs up. But it also means they've got scope in the AMP system to play around with. Do you want to play around with the primary component of that ability, the spell, the damage, the healing that it provides, or do you want to play around with the buff component that's kind of a residual as well?
So the thing that I'm taking away from this at the moment is we'd better look at the clock and start to draw things to a close here before we go into post-show. Is it's actually the class design offers quite a rich palette. Way back when, in the early days, people were panicking and going, "Laz, that's only 9 buttons, that'll be too simplistic. Where's the depth?" But you're having to make choices. And with such things as not having a dedicated, I'm a support, and I exclude healer from support. I'm a buffer, I'm a pure crowd controller, and having the guy that says, well, we need that in our group, but who wants to be that person who's going to have, be nowhere on the damage numbers? Everyone's having to deal with all of those different tasks, so everyone's got an increased number of choices to actually make. So, as you alluded to earlier, that headroom for skill, that headroom for smart decision making, that headroom for personal accountability and personal survivability, making the right choices at the right time, seems to be getting larger and larger and larger. And that, for me, is a very, very good thing indeed.
Yeah.
Not just for the Spellslinger, but for the game as a whole. It makes me smile in anticipation. So I think it's time to do a little bit of summation. We'll jump to you first, Kaeyi. If you're going to be running around at any point on or in a Spellslinger, what do you take away from the class? So let's have what do you think of it as a concept? What do you most want to know or hope to see on the stream tomorrow? And any parting thoughts or questions?
I really like the fact that it is very mobile and has a long range. And I definitely will try it out and make that decision as to whether I want to be Esper or Spellslinger or any of the other classes that aren't announced. I think it's very interesting. I don't think it's like anything we've ever seen before, as much as we can say it's kind of magey, kind of huntery. I think it's got some very unique abilities, like stepping into the void. I'm on the stream. I do really want to see just some more abilities, really, and to see what else it can do other than what we've seen in the dev speak. Because as much as we know that it can shoot a really long mystical bullet and it can step into the void, it can do some various other things. I really want to see how it controls enemies as well, because you may be leveling on your own, and yeah, fair enough, the Esper has more control, but you're going to need some controllers as Spellslinger. So I think it would be cool to see those kind of abilities and see, really, like you said, how it kites, because people are naming it the kiter. If it has got any slows, if it's got anything like that, any stuns, I think that, for me, that's what I really want to see.
Okay, before we bounce off to Gazimoff, a quick wave to Pseudo, say get well soon. Just joined us in the chat. Gazimoff, it's the same questions to yourself. What would a mad psychotic chewer make of circumstances?
So I think that Kaeyi really hit the nail on the head there. One of the things that's really going to separate the average gun-toting Spellslinger from someone who really knows their class is what they can do with the versatility of it. And that's something that I'm really hoping is going to come out tomorrow. We understand that they can DPS and that they are a solid, mobile, reliable DPSer. We understand that they can heal, although we haven't seen much in terms of Spellslinger healing, and I would like to kind of get across that. But it's the whole spectrum of everything else in between. Let's see some more utility. Let's see some more snazzy effects. Let's see some kiting, and let's look at how the various different ways in which you might play a Spellslinger and really make it your own for the various different situations. And ultimately, I'm hoping to see a fair few more deaths as well, because I think the more deaths we see, the more people realise this is not your grandma's MMO. This is not a cakewalk.
I just have to pick up on this and laugh at some of the comments in the Reddit and in the stream the other day. So people came to the conclusion, someone has died. Clearly the devs are bad at playing the game.
Yeah, that's the conclusion that you make, yeah, obviously.
I have to say, I see a flaw in this logic. Suffice to say that game developers...
The people who made this game are bad at this game.
I fear that's not the case, and I fear there will be many squashed Espers and Spellslingers laying on the floor in a pool of eviscerated entrails in the future. But as Gazimoff says, it's about the utility, it's about the headroom for skill. I'd love to see what they're doing with the kiting abilities and how skill-based that is. You know, can a really skillful player do something I used to do as a hunter and kite 2 or 3 things round in a circle? We just don't know yet. So there's something for the stream tomorrow, guys. Let's see a Spellslinger run around kiting a pair of mobs, please, if it is possible. That would tell me a lot.
Pick up Metal Maul and see how far they can kite it.
Whether the game mechanics leash it or not, we don't know. I suspect they might do, because in even back in the day, they had to turn around and go, actually, things need to leash sometimes. What's this demon doing in Stormwind? Oh, wait. Good times indeed. But we've had a look at the Spellslinger. The drop has happened. The MMA has raised some questions, and we wait with bated breath for the stream tomorrow. And at that point, I think it's time to do that wrap up. Before we do, let's just touch briefly on a few things that are happening on MMOBuff going forwards. So let me think. Well, Monday, of course, we have the next edition of MMOBuff, and we are covering MMO gameplay as a solo player. Now, this is a little bit of a divisive topic, and I have to put my hand up and go, groups, please. But
Yeah.
you can't always get a group. You have to have stuff to do at 2 in the morning when you're being an insomniac and all the sensible people are in bed, or if you're
and
just
you're grinding and farming.
So, what are design principles in MMOs for solo play? We're going to look at a number of games and see what people are doing and allude to what people might be doing in the future. So that's Monday. Wednesday there is another edition of Top Draw, and that is going to be part 2 of our examination of deck building, card concepts, looking at things like tempo and what does it mean in card games. We have some streaming happening in the week. I'm lucky enough to be running around playing Reaper of Souls at the moment, and you know what? I have a hunch I'll be back doing some more of that with my little hardcore character, trying very hard not to die as it heads into level 15 and onwards. But I'm sure there's other things happening. Kaeyi, Gazimoff, what have you got happening this week?
I'll let Kaeyi go first.
Yeah, I'm just trying to pay as many people as I can to get a PlayStation 4 early. I've just got my Xbox One. I'm just waiting for that to get here, really. So I'm just checking out all of the launch titles, and that's pretty much it, really. Yeah, just next gen.
Then I shall see if I can get you to run around with me somewhere and see if we can find that to be fun. Gazimoff.
So currently I'm catching up on EVE Online Rubicon, which is going to be a bit interesting. I'm also hoping to grab the Double XP weekend that's happening in SWTOR at the moment. SWTOR's launching their galactic spacefaring thing. Their beta starts on December the 3rd for that, so I'm really looking forward to that. I want to try and get my characters up to the right level for it, because I've got a particular spaceflight junkie who's going to be in that. Apart from that, I'm going to be braving the midnight crowds for the PlayStation 4 Europe launch next Friday as well. And then in a couple of weeks' time, I shall be heading off to Sweden, so I shall not be on Cosmotronic and MMOBuff for a couple of days.
Off to eat meatballs. While I'm missing out on the PS4 launch shenanigans this time round, but I'm being reminded quite rightly by Pseudo. Now I know why Pseudo has left her sickbed to come and type characters into the chat, and that is, of course, we have another competition running. And to use an oft not used phrase, it's a bit of a doozy. So we came back from BlizzCon, we're now in the right time zone, and that's all fantastic. But we brought some stuffs back with me. So
For me?
Well, maybe you could enter. You're not being barred from entering. In fact, yes, Kaeyi, we need you to tweet this and see who else can pick up on its lead. But you have to decide whether you're going to start an Alliance tweet or a Horde tweet. So we have
Alliance tweet.
We have Alliance are winning 3-1 versus Horde at the moment, by the way. So you have to tweet either Alliance or Horde. There is an article on the MMOBuff.TV website explaining it all with the exact tweets, and you can even click them to have it tweeted on your account for you. And if you retweet one of the two tweets, Horde or Alliance, and if you follow MMOBuff on Twitter, then you will be going into a draw on Monday. It's not very far away now. To be winning a signed t-shirt signed by all the Blizzard developers. This includes some of the WoW devs.
Plushy.
Yes, some of the WoW devs, some of the Diablo devs, and of course the Hearthstone developers all have signed these two t-shirts. There's one Horde one, there's one Alliance one, hence why the two tweets. But there's a few other prizes. The grand prize includes the sold-out Murloc plushie. It includes the Hearthstone beta key, and stuffs. So hit up MMOBuff.TV, enter the competition, and we will be announcing the winners on Monday. Gazimoff, you appear to have a red frog on your head.
I just
It's not a frog.
It.
This is actually a little Defiance Hellbug.
Ah, wunderbar.
Yeah.
It's spiky.
This is not a prize. It's a Hellbug.
Gazimoff.
I want a Murloc plushie.
Well, we have what might be the last Murloc plushie in Europe for all we know, because they have sold out. And that one's courtesy of our friends at Blizzard to give away. So do hit up that competition, guys. Make best use of it. But on that note, It's time for us to say goodbye before we do a few minutes chat in the post-show. So, from Gazimoff.
Goodbye.
And from Kaeyi.
Bye.
And from me, well, this is Mizpah for MMOBuff.TV and Cosmotronic. Signing out. There we go. We has people.
Scaramouche, can you do the
fandango?
Gazimoff in the corner, very, very near me.
Me, Galileo.
Cosmotronic, Cosmotronic,
Galileo.
Cosmotronic, it is time.